Story 1. Story 1. The Whispering Walls. The scent of pine needles and damp earth clung to the air. My wife, Sarah, and I had finally found our dream home, a secluded cabin nestled deep within the Redwood National Park. We'd spent months searching for a place to escape the city's relentless clamor, a sanctuary where we could reconnect. Little did we know, we were walking into a nightmare. The first week was idyllic. We hiked amongst giants, their canopies filtering the sunlight into ethereal shafts. We cooked meals on the wood-burning stove, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the log walls. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. The city's anxieties seemed to melt away with each passing sunset. Then, the whispers started. At first, I dismissed them as the wind whistling through the ancient trees. Soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to brush the edge of hearing. Sarah didn't seem to notice them at all. "You're working too hard," she'd say, laughing. "The forest is getting to you." I tried to believe her. I really did. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, slithering into my dreams, weaving themselves into the fabric of the cabin. I started waking up in a cold sweat, the sound of my own racing heart echoing in the suffocating darkness. One evening, as Sarah read by the fire, I heard a distinct voice, clear as a bell, whisper my name. "David," it hissed, close to my ear. I jumped, knocking over my glass of water. Sarah looked up, startled. "What's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "Did you hear that?" I stammered, my voice trembling. She shook her head. "Hear what, David?" I knew then that whatever this was, it was targeting me. The whispers escalated into chilling pronouncements, fragmented sentences laced with malice. "Soon, join us, flesh." Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows stretching into grotesque, shifting shapes. I felt a constant, oppressive presence, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. One night, I woke up to find myself standing outside, the frigid night air biting at my skin. I had no memory of leaving the bed, no recollection of opening the door. The forest loomed around me, an impenetrable wall of darkness. The whispers were everywhere, a chorus of unseen voices swirling in the wind. Terrified, I stumbled back inside, slamming the door behind me. Sarah was still asleep, her face peaceful in the dim light of the dying embers. I crawled back into bed, pulling the covers tight around me. But sleep wouldn't come. The whispers had morphed into guttural growls, emanating from the darkness beneath the floorboards. I felt something cold brush against my leg. I screamed. Sarah jolted awake, her eyes wide with fear. "David!" "What is it?" I couldn't speak. I could only point, trembling, at the floor. She followed my gaze, her face paling. There, on the wooden planks, was a dark, viscous stain that spread like a creeping shadow. It reeked of something ancient and foul, a smell that burned my nostrils and made my stomach churn. We fled the cabin, leaving everything behind. We drove through the night, the headlights cutting through the swirling fog. I didn't look back, but I could feel the presence following us, clinging to the car like a shroud. We never spoke about what happened in the cabin. We tried to rebuild our lives, to forget the whispers, the shadows, the stench. But we couldn't. The fear remained, a constant companion, whispering in the corners of our minds. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear it. A soft, insidious whisper, my name echoing in the darkness. And I wonder, what would have happened if we had stayed? What was waiting for us beneath the floorboards? What did the whispers want? The thought chills me to the bone, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of reality, waiting to claim us. Waiting for me. Story 2. Story 2. The Whispering Pines. The wind, a constant, mournful sigh through the towering pines, was the soundtrack of my childhood summers at Grandma Ilara's cabin. Nestled deep in the Adirondacks, the cabin was a sanctuary, a place where the city's clamor faded into the rustle of leaves and the distant cries of hawks. This summer, however, the familiar music had a discordant note. "Grandma, what's that sound?" I asked, barely 10 years old, perched on the porch swing. She paused, her knitting needles still, and listened. "Just the wind, dear," she said finally, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. But it wasn't just the wind. It was a whisper, soft and sibilant, laced through the pine's song, a sound like dry leaves skittering across parched earth. I dismissed it as my imagination, a trick of the deepening twilight. As the days passed, the whisper grew more insistent, weaving itself into the fabric of the forest. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a chilling counterpoint to the natural sounds of the woods. I started avoiding the forest, preferring the dusty safety of Grandma Ilara's bookshelves. One particularly stifling afternoon, I found Grandma Ilara staring out the window, her face etched with an unfamiliar tension. The air hung heavy and still, the pines eerily silent. "They're here," she murmured, more to herself than to me. Her voice was thin, brittle, like ice about to crack. "Who's here, Grandma?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She turned to me, her eyes wide and unseeing. "The ones who listen to the trees," she said, her voice trembling. "The ones who walk between the worlds." Terror, cold and sharp, pierced me. I didn't understand what she meant, but the fear radiating from her was palpable, suffocating. That night, the whispers intensified. They were no longer distant murmurs, but close, intimate, slithering into my dreams. I woke up in a cold sweat, the oppressive silence of the cabin broken only by the frantic thumping of my heart. The following day, Grandma Ilara was gone. Her bed was untouched, the front door unlocked. A single, withered pine cone lay on her pillow. Panic clawed at my throat. I ran outside, the midday sun offering no solace. The forest, usually alive with the chirping of birds and the buzzing of insects, was deathly silent. The whispers, however, were louder than ever, a cacophony of sibilant voices that seemed to press against my eardrums. I stumbled through the undergrowth, calling for Grandma Ilara, my voice swallowed by the oppressive stillness. The trees seemed to watch me, their branches twisted and gnarled like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I felt a presence, unseen but undeniable, closing in on me. Suddenly, I saw it. A clearing, bathed in an unnatural, pulsating light. In the center stood a circle of towering pines, their branches interwoven to form a grotesque canopy. Beneath the canopy, figures moved, dark and indistinct, their movements jerky and unnatural. The whispers emanated from this circle, amplified and distorted, a chorus of inhuman voices. Frozen in terror, I watched as one of the figures detached itself from the group and began to move towards me. It was tall and slender, its form obscured by the shifting light. As it approached, I could make out its face, pale and gaunt, with eyes that glowed with an unearthly luminescence. It smiled, a slow, predatory smile that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. I screamed, a primal scream born of pure, unadulterated terror, and turned to run. The whispers pursued me, mocking, taunting, promising a fate worse than death. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my legs leaden. The forest seemed to shift and change around me, the trees becoming a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. I don't know how long I ran. Eventually, I stumbled onto a dirt road, my clothes torn, my body scratched and bleeding. A passing motorist picked me up and took me to the nearest town. I told them about Grandma Ilara, about the whispers, about the creatures in the clearing. They listened patiently, their faces etched with pity and disbelief. They searched the forest, but found nothing. Grandma Ilara was never seen again. I returned to the city, a shell of my former self. The whispers followed me, a constant reminder of the horror I witnessed. They are fainter now, but they are still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment when I am vulnerable, when I am alone. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city sleeps, I hear the wind rustling through the trees outside my window. And within that rustle, I hear the whispers, soft and sibilant, calling my name. I know they are waiting. They are always waiting. And I fear what will happen when they finally find me. I fear what lies hidden within the whispering pines. Story 3. Story 3, The Whispering Walls. The PTA meeting was droning on. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the faces of the parents gathered in Mrs. Henderson's fourth-grade classroom. My husband, Mark, sat beside me, stifling a yawn. We'd moved to Ashwood only a month ago, a picturesque New England town boasting top-tier schools and a charming historical district. Charming was one word for it. Claustrophobic was another. So, the bake sale, Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice like chalk scraping across a blackboard. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from our babysitter, Sarah, everything okay? Lily keeps saying someone's whispering in her room. I felt a prickle of unease. Lily, our 5-year-old, had an active imagination, but she wasn't prone to making things up. Just her teddy bear, probably, I texted back, trying to dismiss the feeling. The meeting finally ended, and we hurried home. The house, a 2-story colonial built in the 1800s, felt colder than usual. The air was thick with a musty scent I couldn't quite place. Lily? I called out. Silence. Then, a muffled sob from upstairs. Mark and I exchanged a worried look and climbed the stairs. Lily was huddled in the corner of her room, clutching her teddy bear. Her eyes were wide and filled with tears. What's wrong, sweetheart? Mark asked, kneeling beside her. The whispers, she whimpered, burying her face in his shoulder. They won't stop. I tried to rationalize it. An old house settling, the wind whistling through cracks. But the unease lingered. That night, I lay awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house. Every rustle of leaves against the window sounded like whispered voices. Over the next few days, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a constant, murmuring drone just below the threshold of hearing. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, fleeting shadows, flickering lights. My appetite vanished, replaced by a constant gnawing anxiety. Mark dismissed it as stress, the pressures of a new job and settling into a new town. He didn't hear the whispers. He didn't see the shadows. Or maybe he just didn't want to. Sarah refused to babysit anymore. The house, it gives me the creeps, she stammered, her face pale. I swear I heard someone calling my name, but there was no one there. The isolation was suffocating. The other parents at school seemed to avoid me, their smiles strained, their conversations clipped. Had they heard something? Did they know something I didn't? One evening, I found Lily sitting in the living room, staring at the blank television screen. Her eyes were glazed over, her face devoid of emotion. Lily? I said softly. She didn't respond. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were whispering something. I leaned closer. They want you, she whispered, her voice hollow and unfamiliar. They want you to join them. A chilling dread washed over me. I pulled her close, trying to comfort her, but her body was stiff and unresponsive. Her eyes stared straight ahead, seeing something I couldn't. That night, the whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices swirling around me. The house seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy. I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking presence. Mark slept soundly beside me, oblivious to the terror that gripped me. He was a solid, rational presence, a bulwark against the creeping madness, but even his presence couldn't dispel the growing sense of dread. I got out of bed and went downstairs. The whispers were loudest in the living room, centered around the fireplace. I stood before it, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur, a smell that clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. Suddenly, the fire roared to life, though we hadn't lit it. The flames danced and swirled, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. In the flickering light, I saw it, a face in the flames, a malevolent visage with eyes that burned with an unholy light. It was then I realized the whispers weren't just in the walls. They were inside me, inside my head, twisting my thoughts, poisoning my mind. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I turned and ran, fleeing the living room, the house, the whispers that now echoed in my very being. I ran until I reached the edge of town, the familiar streets twisting and turning into an alien landscape. I looked back at the house, silhouetted against the night sky. The windows glowed with an eerie light, like the eyes of a predator watching its prey. I don't know how long I stood there, the cold night air biting at my skin. The whispers had subsided, replaced by a chilling silence that was even more terrifying. I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. But I also knew I couldn't leave Lily. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, I turned and started walking back towards Ashwood, towards the house, towards the whispers. Towards the unknown. What awaited me, I couldn't say. But one thing was certain, I was no longer alone. They were with me, inside me, a part of me. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that they weren't going anywhere.